From the Sundance Film Festival in Park City, Utah, this is Democracy Now!
What really worries us in terms of whether the agreement on the cessation of hostilities will stick or not is the capacity of the rebel group. Given that the bulk of the rebel army is made up of civilians who are not subject to military discipline, orders to stop fighting may not be obeyed.
After more than a month of violence that left thousands dead, rivals in South Sudan reach a ceasefire agreement. We'll look at a new documentary that shows how South Sudan has become ground zero for contemporary colonialism in Africa.
Those remarks, those references to light, were literally and figuratively appropriate, because today we are literally and figuratively bringing light.
We come as friends. A new film depicts the conflicting political, corporate, and religious forces trying to shape Sudan while simultaneously applauding the alleged independence of the world's newest state. What emerges is a devastating critique of the consequences of cultural and economic imperialism. We'll speak with the film's director, Hubert Salper. Then this week marks the 41st anniversary of Roe v. Wade. Here at Sundance, a new film, Obvious Child, breaks new ground. It's a romantic comedy about abortion. We'll speak with the film's director, Gillian Robespierre.
We were sort of disenchanted and frustrated by the limited representation of women, real women, in movies, and unplanned pregnancy in movies. And instead of waiting and waiting, we decided to go out and make this on our own.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. An independent congressional panel has concluded the NSA's bulk collection of phone records is illegal. In a new report, the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board says the program has had only minimal benefits in stopping terrorism and should be brought to an end. The panel says the program, quote, lacks a viable legal foundation under Section 215 of the Patriot Act, implicates constitutional concerns under the First and Fourth Amendments, raises serious threats to privacy and civil liberties as a policy matter, and has shown only limited value, adding, quote, the board recommends that the government end the program. President Obama said last week he intends to reform the bulk collection, but his plan would preserve its capabilities. The panel's conclusion will likely reinforce calls for the granting of clemency to Edward Snowden, the whistleblower who brought bulk collection and other surveillance programs to light. At a public event on Thursday, Attorney General Eric Holder continued to rule out clemency for Snowden. Holder said he's only open to discussing a plea deal if Snowden returns home and pleads guilty.
The notion of clemency was not something that we were willing to consider. But as I said, were he to come back to the United States, enter a plea, we would engage with his lawyers.
And presumably that would be a guilty plea to something.
Yeah.
Right.
In an online chat on Thursday, Snowden said he would consider returning to the U.S. if the government reformed its whistleblower protection laws, which failed to cover him as a private contractor. Referring to his concerns about mass surveillance, Snowden said, quote, it's not good for our country, it's not good for the world, and I wasn't going to stand by and watch it happen no matter how much it cost me. South Sudan rivals have signed a ceasefire agreement after 5 weeks of violence that killed thousands of people and displaced more than 500,000. The ceasefire is being hailed as the first step to ending the conflict, but both sides have voiced caution and reiterated concerns over unmet demands. The most recent bout of fighting began last month as a political dispute between President Salva Kiir and his former vice president, but quickly escalated into ethnic clashes that raised fears of a civil war. We'll have more on South Sudan after headlines. The UN-brokered Syrian peace talks have hit a new snag today, with opposition delegates refusing to meet directly with government counterparts. The two sides were due for their first face-to-face talks in Geneva after an opening round of speeches on Wednesday. But the Assad regime rejected the opposition's precondition of endorsing the formation of a transitional government. UN envoy Lakhdar Brahimi is shuttling between the two sides today to keep the meeting alive. At least 5 people have been killed and over 70 wounded in 3 separate bombings in the Egyptian capital of Cairo. The first attack hit the main headquarters of the Egyptian police, shattering windows and leaving a gaping hole in the street. No one's claimed responsibility, but a Sinai-based militant group that carried out previous attacks on police released a statement threatening further violence. The military government has used previous incidents to increase its crackdown on the Muslim Brotherhood. In a statement, the Brotherhood said it, quote, strongly condemns the cowardly bombings. The attacks come one day before the 3rd anniversary of the launch of the uprising that ousted Hosni Mubarak. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani has issued a new overture to the U.S. and neighboring Middle Eastern countries, saying his government is ready for constructive engagement. Rouhani spoke Thursday at the World Economic Forum in Davos.
I hereby announce that one of the theoretical and practical pillars of my government is constructive engagement with the world. My government is fully prepared and ready to engage with all neighboring countries to achieve shared practical solutions and sustainable legal regimes on a range of issues such as the environment, joint economic projects, trade expansion, realization of the Palestinian people's rights, tackling the humanitarian crisis in Syria, security of the Persian Gulf, as well as the fight against terrorism and extremism.
The interim deal to slow Iran's nuclear program in return for sanctions relief took effect earlier this week. India's Supreme Court has ordered a probe after the gang rape of a woman in eastern West Bengal state. 13 suspects have been accused of gang raping the victim on the orders of village elders as punishment for her having a relationship with a man outside their tribe. A doctor treating the victim says she's in stable condition.
She is normal. I have already told she is stable, so she is taking her food and other fluids also.
When will she be discharged?
It is yet to decide, and doctors are looking on her.
Last month marked the first anniversary of the death of an Indian woman who was gang raped on a New Delhi bus. That case ignited India and drew attention to sexual violence around the world. A new study says the number of civilian casualties from the U.S. drone war in Pakistan saw a major decline in 2013. The Bureau of Investigative Journalism says as many as 4, but possibly no civilians were killed by CIA drones last year. As many as 63 civilians were killed in Pakistan the previous year. Yemen, meanwhile, saw as many as 29 civilians killed, including up to 15 in an attack on a wedding convoy late last month. A federal appeals court has sided with a challenge to oil drilling off Alaska's northwest coast. A coalition of native and environmental groups had objected to the U.S. government's authorization of oil and gas projects in the Chukchi Sea, warning of threats to sea life and contamination of the ocean. In a ruling this week, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit said the government performed an inadequate assessment of the potential environmental impact that used only the best-case scenario. The ruling could jeopardize the oil giant Shell's plan to resume drilling operations in the Arctic this summer. Shell previously suspended its operation after a series of mishaps. In a joint statement, the plaintiffs in the case called the ruling a victory for the Arctic, adding, quote, "We should not have to depend on courts to protect our oceans. President Obama must now take seriously his obligation to rethink whether and under what conditions to allow risky industrial activities in the Chukchi Sea," they said. President Obama has launched a new task force to combat sexual assault on college campuses. A new White House report says 1 in 5 women, college students, have been sexually assaulted at school, but just 12% notify police. The task force will be asked to lay out goals for increasing rates of arrests, prosecutions, and convictions. Virginia has announced it will no longer defend its ban on same-sex marriage from federal lawsuits. Attorney General Mark Herring said he's concluded the ban's unconstitutional, a sharp departure from his predecessor, Republican Ken Cuccinelli. The family of an African-American teenager executed in South Carolina nearly 70 years ago is asking for a new trial. 14-year-old George Stinney Jr. was put to death in 1944 for the murders of 2 white girls. He was the youngest prisoner to be executed by the U.S. government in the last century. In an historic move, Stinney's family says they want the case retried in order to clear his name. Defense attorney Miller Shealy says Stinney's family deserves justice.
There was no cross-examination. That's what we know. This case was handled so poorly. His family was treated so poorly in the circumstances of March to June 1944 that his rights were snuffed out then. And it was only later, when the state changed, the political system changed, and the criminal procedure revolution we have today, that we are able to come before the court and even bring his rights in his case to the court in some way where he can get justice.
And an African-American teenager in Philadelphia is facing charges stemming from an incident in which police left him seriously injured. 16-year-old Darren Manning was on his way to a basketball game when he was stopped and frisked earlier this month. Manning says that in the course of being patted down, an officer squeezed his genitals with such force that he suffered a ruptured testicle. Manning underwent emergency surgery and is still having trouble walking. His family now says they worry if he'll be able to father children. Manning, a straight-A student, has now been charged with aggravated assault, resisting arrest, and reckless endangerment. A trial has been set for March. On Thursday, a crowd of demonstrators braved freezing temperatures to rally in support of Manning outside a preliminary hearing. Manning's attorney calling for a federal investigation into whether police violated his client's civil rights. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.